A bright Tuesday morning marked the beginning of what would become a remarkable story of justice and change. A young boy, just 11 years old, stood excitedly at gate B17 with his mother, clutching his favorite astronomy book. They were heading to Atlanta to surprise his grandmother for her 70th birthday, and he had spent the previous night carefully picking out his best outfit, a crisp blue button-down shirt and neatly pressed khaki pants. The airport buzzed with its usual morning energy. The smell of coffee wafted from nearby cafes, and the sound of rolling suitcases created a steady rhythm against the polished floor. The boy's mother, a respected HR director at a major tech company, had taught him well about traveling ethically. He sat quietly at the gate, completely absorbed in his book about black holes and distant galaxies, occasionally sharing interesting facts with his mom in hushed tones. As they began the boarding process, the boy could hardly contain his excitement. This was only his third time flying, and he loved watching the world become tiny beneath him. He kept his astronomy book close, planning to spot constellations from the airplane window, even though his mother gently reminded him they'd be flying during daylight. The line moved smoothly as passengers filed onto the plane. The boy and his mother presented their boarding passes, received warm smiles from the gate agents, and walked down the jet bridge. Other families boarded too. There was a toddler having a small tantrum about wanting his tablet, and two teenage girls were giggling loudly while taking selfies. As they reached their assigned seats in row 14, the boy carefully placed his backpack under the seat as his mother had taught him. He pulled out his astronomy book again, eager to resume reading about Saturn's rings. Several passengers around them smiled at his obvious enthusiasm for science, with one elderly gentleman even commenting on how nice it was to see a young person so interested in learning. However, the peaceful scene suddenly shifted when a flight attendant approached their row. Despite the boy's quiet demeanor and perfect compliance with all airline rules, the attendant's expression was stern and unwelcoming. While other children on the plane moved about and chatted freely, the attendant focused solely on the boy, claiming he was being disruptive, though nearby passengers would later confirm he had been doing nothing more than quietly reading his book. The attendant's voice carried through the cabin as she insisted they would need to leave the aircraft, providing no clear explanation for this demand. The boy looked up from his book, confusion and hurt evident in his eyes. He turned to his mother, whispering, "Mom, what did I do wrong?" His mother, maintaining her professional composure despite the situation, took a deep breath and reached for her phone to document what was unfolding. The unfairness of the situation didn't go unnoticed. A woman 3 rows ahead, who happened to be a civil rights attorney, began recording the interaction on her phone. A popular social media influencer seated in the row behind them started live streaming, ensuring that this moment of injustice wouldn't go undocumented. Other passengers began speaking up, pointing out that the boy had been exceptionally well behaved compared to other children on the flight. Through it all, the mother demonstrated remarkable poise. Drawing on her years of experience in human resources, she calmly requested to speak with a supervisor while keeping one hand reassuringly on her son's shoulder. She knew that maintaining composure was crucial, even as other passengers began expressing their outrage at the situation. The boy, following his mother's example, remained quiet and dignified, though his hands trembled slightly as he held his astronomy book closer. The mother's composed approach immediately started drawing support from fellow travelers. A businessman in a suit stood up and declared that the boy had been perfectly behaved since boarding. A teacher on her way to a conference spoke up about how she wished all her students were as focused on reading as this young man. The tide of support began to turn what could have been just another sad story of discrimination into something quite different. The situation on the plane continued to unfold as more passengers became aware of what was happening. A gentle murmur of disapproval spread through the cabin, growing louder as people shared their observations with one another. "I've been watching this young man since we boarded," said a grandmother from across the aisle. "He's been nothing but a perfect gentleman." The flight attendant, perhaps realizing that her actions were being recorded by multiple passengers, began to look uncomfortable. Still, she insisted on her position, though she struggled to provide any specific examples of disruptive behavior when other passengers pressed her for details. The contrast became even more apparent as a young child 3 rows ahead continued to kick the seat in front of him without any intervention from the crew. The boy, still holding his astronomy book, looked out the window to hide the tears forming in his eyes. He had been so excited about this trip, about surprising his grandmother, about watching the clouds from above. Now he felt like he had done something terribly wrong, that he couldn't figure out what it was. His mother noticed his distress and squeezed his hand gently, whispering words of encouragement. What happened next showed how quickly justice can work when people stand together. A passenger who had been quietly typing on his laptop stood up and introduced himself as a reporter for a major news network. He asked if he could interview some of the surrounding passengers about what they had witnessed. The flight attendant's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, the civil rights attorney who had been recording everything made a quick phone call to her office. Within minutes, the airline's ground supervisor was notified of the situation. The supervisor, a veteran of the airline industry with 20 years of experience, immediately headed to the aircraft. She had dealt with similar situations before and knew the importance of swift action. As the supervisor walked down the aisle, she could see the tension in the cabin. The boy sat quietly, still confused and hurt, while his mother maintained her dignified composure. The supervisor asked to see the security footage from the gate area, which was quickly pulled up on a tablet. The footage showed exactly what the other passengers had been saying: a well-behaved young man, excited about his trip, doing nothing wrong. Then came the moment that changed everything. The regional manager of the airline, who happened to be at the airport for a meeting, received word of the incident and arrived at the plane. He took one look at the situation, reviewed the evidence, and made an immediate decision. The flight attendant was asked to leave the aircraft, and she walked off, her head down, as passengers applauded. The manager turned to the boy and his mother with a sincere apology. "We failed you today," he said, looking directly at the young boy. "But we're going to make it right." He personally escorted them to first class, upgrading their seats for both legs of their journey. But more importantly, he promised that this incident would lead to real changes in how the airline trained its staff. Other passengers on the plane began sharing their contact information with the boy's mother, offering to set up as witnesses if needed. The reporter who had been documenting everything asked if he could follow up with them for a story about how this incident could help create positive change. The civil rights attorney offered her card, suggesting that this could become a teaching moment for other airlines. The atmosphere on the plane had completely transformed. What started as an ugly incident of discrimination had become a powerful moment of community and justice. The boy, still quiet but no longer crying, opened his astronomy book again. An older passenger leaned over and asked him to share what he was reading about. As he began explaining about black holes and distant galaxies, his eyes lit up again, and for the first time since the incident began, he smiled. The scene at Gate B-17 quickly transformed into something unexpected. A crowd had gathered as word spread through the terminal about what had happened on the plane. Ground staff members whispered among themselves, and other travelers stopped to watch the unfolding events. The story was already spreading across social media, with the hashtag #AstronomyBookBoy trending locally. As passengers who had witnessed the incident began sharing their videos online, the airline's corporate office in Dallas sprang into action. The marketing team was monitoring their social media mentions when they noticed an unusual spike in activity. Video clips showing the well-behaved young boy with his astronomy book, contrasted with the flight attendant's unexplained demands, were being shared thousands of times per minute. The boy and his mother had just settled into their new first-class seats when the captain made an unusual announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice crackled over the intercom, "I've been made aware of the incident that occurred during boarding. I want to personally apologize to our young passenger and his mother. On my flights, we judge people by their actions, not their appearance. We're ready for takeoff now, and I hope everyone will join me in making this a positive flight experience." The cabin erupted in applause. A flight attendant, different from the one who had caused the problem, approached their seats with 2 warm cookies and hot chocolate for the boy. She knelt down beside him and asked about his astronomy book, showing genuine interest as he explained about the different types of galaxies he'd been reading about. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, passengers were still discussing what they'd witnessed. A teacher from row 23 was explaining to her seatmate how she planned to use this as a teaching moment in her classroom. "Kids need to see that speaking up against unfairness can make a real difference," she said. The reporter who had documented everything was already drafting his article on his laptop, occasionally asking nearby passengers for their perspectives. The airline's CEO, upon hearing about the incident, didn't wait for the usual corporate response timeline. He immediately called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The video clips were playing on a large screen in the boardroom as they discussed not just how to respond to this specific incident, but how to prevent anything similar from happening again. Back on the plane, the boy had relaxed enough to enjoy the first-class experience. His mother watched with relief as he excitedly discovered the extended legroom and the window that was larger than in economy class. When he pressed his face against it to watch the ground crew finishing their preparations, several passengers smiled at his returned enthusiasm. The civil rights attorney who had recorded the incident was busy making calls from her seat. She had connections with several organizations that focused on airline passenger rights, and she saw this as an opportunity to push for industry-wide changes. "This isn't just about one incident," she explained to her colleague over the phone. "This is about setting a new standard for how airlines handle these situations." As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, the boy pulled out his astronomy book again. This time, a businessman across the aisle asked if he could hear more about what he was reading. Soon, a small group of first-class passengers was engaged in an impromptu astronomy lesson led by an 11-year-old expert who had recovered his confidence and was eager to share his knowledge. The story was spreading beyond the airport now. News websites were picking up the viral videos, and social media discussions were expanding to include similar experiences and calls for change. But inside the plane, as it lifted off into the bright morning sky, something more immediate and personal was happening. A young boy who had faced unfair treatment was discovering that most people, when given the chance, will stand up for what's right. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, the story continued to unfold both in the air and on the ground. The airline's CEO was already planning something unprecedented. He had asked his executive team to arrange for him to meet the boy and his mother when they landed in Atlanta. This wasn't just going to be a standard corporate apology. He wanted to turn this incident into a moment of real change. The flight itself had become something special. The boy, now completely at ease in his first-class seat, had become the unofficial star of the journey. When he mentioned to a nearby passenger that he dreamed of becoming an astronomer, word spread through the cabin. Soon, a university professor sitting a few rows back came forward to share that she actually taught astronomy. She spent 20 minutes explaining to him how telescopes work, drawing diagrams on a napkin while other passengers listened in. The mother, watching all of this unfold, felt a mix of emotions. The hurt from the initial incident was still there, but it was being overshadowed by the incredible response from everyone around them. She had taught her son that when faced with unfairness, the best response was to stay dignified and let your character speak for itself. Today, she was watching that lesson come to life. Meanwhile, the videos from the incident had reached major news networks. Producers were already calling the airline's press office, requesting statements and interviews. What made these videos particularly powerful was how they captured not just the discrimination, but the immediate response from other passengers. People weren't just watching another story about injustice, they were seeing how everyday people could stand up and make a difference. The flight attendants on duty now went out of their way to make the journey special. When they learned it was the boy's grandmother's birthday they were flying to celebrate, they arranged a small surprise. Using the airplane supplies, they created a handmade card signed by the crew and many passengers. One flight attendant even found a small toy airplane in her bag that she'd bought for her nephew and gave it to the boy as a gift. The reporter who had been on the plane was still working on his story. He had noticed something remarkable, how the incident had brought the entire plane together. Business travelers who would normally be buried in their laptops were chatting with their seatmates about the experience. A group of high school students in the back had started a social media campaign with the hashtag #StandUpFlyRight, encouraging people to share stories of standing up against discrimination. As they passed over Tennessee, the captain made another announcement. He shared that air traffic control had heard about their story and had given them priority landing clearance in Atlanta. The passengers cheered again, and someone started a spontaneous round of applause for the boy and his mother. The boy, who had been quietly reading about Jupiter's moons, looked up in surprise and gave a shy wave that made everyone smile. His mother took a moment to check her phone during the approved time and was overwhelmed by what she saw. Her professional network had exploded with messages of support. Colleagues from her HR department were already talking about using this as a case study in their corporate training programs. The incident that had started as a painful moment of discrimination was transforming into something powerful and positive. The civil rights attorney had been busy too. During the flight, she had drafted a proposal for new airline industry guidelines. Her idea wasn't to punish airlines, but to work with them to create better training programs and clear protocols for handling similar situations. She showed the draft to the boy's mother, who was impressed by how it focused on education and positive change rather than just penalties. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, the story took another unexpected turn. The pilot received a message from ground control. There would be a special welcoming committee waiting at the gate. The airline's CEO had not only flown in from Dallas, but had also brought along some surprising guests that would make this landing unforgettable. The boy, still engrossed in his astronomy book, had no idea what awaited him. He was just excited to see his grandmother, unaware that this day would become much more than a family reunion. Looking out the window, he pointed excitedly at the Atlanta skyline emerging through the clouds, sharing facts about atmospheric pressure with his new first-class friends who had become an attentive audience to his scientific knowledge. When the plane touched down, the captain made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed that we have some special guests waiting to meet our young astronomer at the gate. I'd like to ask everyone to remain seated for a few minutes after we arrive to allow our special passengers to depart first." The cabin buzzed with curiosity and excitement. As they taxied to the gate, the boy could see several news vans through his window, their satellite dishes reaching into the sky. His mother gently explained that their story had touched many people's hearts, and some important changes might come from what had happened. The boy thought for a moment, then said something that made several nearby passengers tear up. "Maybe this means other kids won't have to feel bad like I did." The scene at the gate was unlike anything the regular travelers had seen before. The airline's CEO stood waiting, but he wasn't alone. Next to him was a familiar face the boy instantly recognized from his astronomy books, a renowned astronaut who had walked on the space station. Behind them, holding a birthday cake, stood his grandmother, who had been picked up by the airline and brought to the gate for this special moment. As they stepped off the plane, the other passengers broke into applause. The boy's grandmother rushed forward to hug him, birthday cake wobbling precariously in her hands. The astronaut stepped forward next, kneeling down to meet the boy at eye level. "I heard you're interested in space," she said, pulling out a patch from her own space mission. "Would you like to learn what it's really like up there?" The CEO then stepped forward, but instead of giving a corporate speech, he did something unexpected. He'd asked the boy what he thought the airline could do better. Right there, in front of the news cameras and gathered crowd, he took out a notebook and wrote down the boy's suggestions. "Sometimes the best ideas come from people who've seen where we need to improve," he said. The civil rights attorney who had been on the flight was invited to join the conversation. She shared her proposal for new industry guidelines, and to everyone's surprise, the CEO agreed on the spot to implement them. He announced that the airline would establish a scholarship program for young people interested in both aviation and astronomy, naming it after their young passenger. The grandmother, still holding her cake, but now surrounded by cameras and well-wishers, couldn't stop smiling. Her birthday had transformed into something far more meaningful. When reporters asked her how she felt, she simply said, "Today showed me that for every person who tries to dim a child's light, there are hundreds more ready to help it shine brighter." The impromptu gathering at the airport gate quickly turned into something even more meaningful. The CEO guided everyone to a nearby conference room that had been hastily transformed into a celebration space. Airport staff had decorated it with pictures of planets and stars, printed from the airport office after hearing about the young astronomy enthusiast's story. The airline's response continued to surprise everyone. Instead of the usual corporate damage control, they were witnessing real, immediate action. The CEO, still holding his notebook with the boy's suggestions, began making calls right there in the room. He arranged for an emergency board meeting to discuss new training programs and policy changes. The young passenger's experience wasn't going to be brushed aside, it was going to create lasting change. The astronaut, who had cleared her schedule for the entire day, sat down with the boy and opened a laptop. Together, they looked at actual footage from space missions, with her explaining details that weren't in any books. Other children at the airport, hearing about what was happening, began drifting into the room with their parents. Soon, there was an impromptu space science class happening in the corner. The grandmother's cake had been placed on a central table, and someone had found candles in the airport gift shop. The gathered crowd, passengers from the flight, airport staff, news reporters, and curious onlookers, all sang happy birthday. The boy helped his grandmother blow out the candles, and for a moment, everyone forgot about the painful incident that had brought them there. But the real work was just beginning. The civil rights attorney had set up an impromptu office in another corner of the room. She was working with airline executives who had rushed to the airport, drafting new policies that would affect not just this airline, but potentially the entire industry. They were calling it the Astronomy Book Protocol, a new standard for training staff and handling situations that could involve bias. News crews were capturing everything, but they weren't just focusing on the negative incident anymore. They were documenting what real change looks like when people come together to make it happen. Local schools began calling the airport, asking if the boy would be willing to share his story with their students. One teacher suggested it could be part of a larger lesson about standing up for what's right. The mother, watching all of this unfold, received a call from her office. Her company's board of directors had heard about what happened and wanted to partner with the airline on their new training initiatives. Her experience as an HR director, combined with her personal experience from this incident, made her the perfect person to help develop these programs. The boy, still clutching his astronomy book and new space mission patch, was no longer the quiet, hurt child from the plane. He was excited, engaged, and already thinking about how to help other kids who might face similar situations. When someone asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, he thought for a moment and said, "Maybe an astronaut who helps make rules to keep everyone safe." As the afternoon went on, more people arrived. A local science museum director heard about the story and showed up with an invitation for a private tour and a junior astronomer membership. A children's book publisher who happened to be in the airport approached the mother about turning their experience into an inspirational story for young readers. "Would you like me to continue with the next part of this evolving story?" The story continued to grow in ways no one could have predicted. As evening approached, the airport conference room had become a hub of activity. The airline's social media team reported that their hashtag was now trending nationwide, with people sharing their own stories of standing up against unfairness and celebrating those who did the right thing. The astronaut, who had spent hours sharing space stories with a growing group of children, made an announcement that brought tears to many eyes. She revealed that she had called her contacts at the Space Center, and they wanted to invite the boy to attend their special summer space camp. Not just as a participant, but as an honored guest who would help them review their own inclusivity practices. The grandmother, who had expected just a quiet birthday celebration, sat in amazement watching her grandson, talking confidently with reporters. He was explaining how his love for astronomy had taught him that in space, everyone looks like tiny dots of light from far away, a perspective that seemed to carry special meaning after today's events. The CEO was still there, long past the time most executives would have left. He had ordered dinner for everyone and was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of airline employees, discussing how to make their training more effective. Someone had brought in a whiteboard, and it was filled with ideas and suggestions from people at all levels of the company. The civil rights attorney's initial proposal had evolved into something bigger. Representatives from 3 other major airlines had heard about what was happening and sent their teams to join the discussion. They were working together, competing companies finding common ground in their commitment to do better. The boy's mother's HR expertise was proving invaluable as they worked to create practical, effective solutions. Local teachers who had arrived earlier were now involved in developing an educational program. They planned to use this story to teach students about astronomy, civil rights, and the power of community support. The boy's simple astronomy book had become a symbol of how education and understanding could overcome prejudice. The news coverage had taken an unexpected turn too. Instead of focusing solely on the negative incident, reporters were highlighting the extraordinary response. They interviewed passengers who had stood up, airline staff who had helped make things right, and airport workers who had jumped in to help organize this impromptu gathering. As evening fell, something magical happened. The airport's maintenance team, inspired by the day's events, had arranged a surprise. They dimmed the terminal lights, and an airport engineer used a special projector to display constellations on the conference room ceiling. The boy, now completely in his element, gave an impromptu astronomy lesson to everyone in the room. The mother received another surprising call. A major educational foundation wanted to establish a scholarship fund inspired by the day's events. They proposed creating opportunities for young science enthusiasts from all backgrounds, naming it after the constellation the boy had been reading about when the incident began. As night fell over Atlanta's airport, the impact of the day's events continued to ripple outward. The conference room had transformed into a kind of command center for positive change. Pizza boxes were scattered around, and people who had been strangers that morning were now working together like old friends, all focused on turning a difficult moment into lasting progress. The airline's website crashed briefly that evening, not from negative comments, but from an overwhelming number of people trying to submit supportive messages and suggestions for their new training program. The tech team, working late into the night, created a special section of the website dedicated to collecting these ideas from the public. The boy, despite the long and emotional day, was still full of energy. He had started drawing pictures of his favorite planets on the whiteboard, adding facts about each one. Airport employees on their breaks would stop by just to listen to him explain why Saturn's rings were so special or what made Mars appear red in the night sky. What began as one child's unfair treatment had blossomed into something extraordinary. A group of business travelers who had witnessed the original incident decided to form a non-profit organization. Their goal was to provide science books and telescopes to schools in underserved communities. They said the boy's passion for astronomy had reminded them of their own childhood dreams. The grandmother, still wearing her birthday crown from earlier, shared stories about her grandson's early fascination with the stars. She told everyone how he would drag his telescope out to their backyard during her visits, teaching her the names of constellations. Now, watching him share that same enthusiasm with a room full of strangers, she couldn't have asked for a better birthday gift. More surprising developments kept coming. A famous musician who had heard about the story while passing through another airport called in. He offered to write a song about looking up at the same stars, no matter who or where you are. The airline CEO immediately suggested using it in their new training videos. The civil rights attorney's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Other lawyers around the country wanted to join the effort to create industry-wide standards for fair treatment. They were calling it the Starlight Initiative, a program that would help ensure every passenger was treated with dignity regardless of their background. The mother had set up an impromptu HR consultation desk. Airline employees kept coming to her with ideas for improving their workplace culture. She noticed that many of them had similar suggestions. They'd wanted to speak up before but hadn't known how. Now they'd felt empowered to share their thoughts about making their airline more welcoming for everyone. As midnight approached, the airport's cleaning staff came in, but instead of asking everyone to leave, they pulled up chairs and joined the conversation. One cleaner shared how he had always loved science too, and now helped his daughter study for her physics tests between shifts. These personal stories kept weaving together, creating connections between people who might never have met otherwise. 3 months after that remarkable day at Atlanta's airport, the impact of what happened continued to grow in unexpected ways. The story had touched people far beyond the original flight, creating waves of positive change that nobody could have predicted. The boy's astronomy book had inspired a whole movement. Libraries across the country started Stars for Everyone reading programs, where children could learn about space while discussing the importance of treating everyone with respect. The airline had donated thousands of science books to schools, each one with a special note encouraging young readers to reach for the stars. The training program that started in that airport conference room was now being used by airlines worldwide. They called it Beyond the Horizon Training, and it went far deeper than typical corporate programs. Flight attendants reported feeling better equipped to handle difficult situations, and passenger complaints had dropped significantly. The boy himself had just returned from space camp, where he had made friends from all over the world. Together, they had learned about rockets and zero gravity, but more importantly, they had learned how small Earth looks from space, just a blue marble where everyone is connected. His new friends still met online every weekend to share their latest astronomy discoveries. The grandmother's birthday cake moment had sparked another tradition. The airline now celebrated special occasions for passengers in unique ways. They kept a supply of astronomy-themed celebration kits on every plane, complete with star-shaped cookies and glow-in-the-dark constellation stickers. Flight attendants said these celebrations were now their favorite part of the job. The mother's HR expertise had helped shape new industry standards. Companies from different sectors started calling her for advice on creating more inclusive workplaces. She was invited to speak at conferences, sharing how one difficult moment had transformed into an opportunity for widespread positive change. The civil rights attorney's Starlight Initiative had grown beyond airlines. Hotels, restaurants, and other service industries were adopting similar programs. They all shared a simple message: everyone deserves to shine. The attorney often said that watching the boy's love for astronomy had reminded her why she became a lawyer, to help create a world where everyone could follow their dreams. The business travelers who started the nonprofit had already distributed telescopes to 50 schools. They would visit classrooms, sharing the story of how a young boy's passion for astronomy had inspired them to make a difference. Students would gather for stargazing events, learning that the night sky belongs to everyone. The airport had changed too. They installed a small observatory in an unused office space where passengers with long layovers could learn about the stars. The cleaning staff member who had shared his love for science now volunteered there between shifts, helping other parents find ways to encourage their children's interests in science. The young boy's story had become more than just a viral moment or a corporate training example. It had grown into a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest changes. Just like the stars he loved to study, his experience had become a light, helping others find their way to a better future. As he told a group of students during a recent school visit, the best thing about looking at the stars is that when we all look up, we're all looking at the same sky. And down here on Earth, we can all help make that sky a little brighter for everyone. The original video of the incident was still online, but now it was usually shared alongside stories of positive change it had inspired. It had become a teaching tool, showing how standing up for what's right, staying true to your passions, and treating others with dignity could create lasting change that reached far beyond one flight, one airport, or one day.